Good afternoon, everyone. It is Monday, September 7th, and it's been a beautiful Labor Day holiday weekend here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina, and I'm celebrating my holiday by preparing my garden for the fall growing season. And in front of me, I have 4 different fall crops that you should be direct sowing into your vegetable gardens that I want to share with you all. And the first fall crop that I want to share with you that you should be direct sowing in your fall garden are beets. Here I have 2 different beets. I have a golden beet and a red beet. And beets are a pretty easy vegetable to grow in your garden. They are a root vegetable and they can take a fairly hard freeze. Last year I grew beets all throughout the winter, and my winter minimum temperature was pretty mild last year, but we hit 22.8 degrees very briefly, and it did no damage at all to my beets. So they can take a pretty hard freeze as long as the freeze breaks when the sun comes up eventually. Beets need to be direct sown into your garden because they are a root, so they don't want to be disturbed once they get planted. So they're not something that you want to transplant out in trays. You could use something like a peat pellet if you really wanted to, but you are going to get the best results by direct sowing them directly into your garden, and they're an incredibly easy thing to sow, and they require very little fertilizer. The next vegetable that you should be direct sowing in your fall garden are peas, and there are different types of peas. There are regular old peas, there are snap peas, there are snow peas. My favorite type of pea by far is the snap pea. I find them to be the sweetest and the easiest to eat and the most tender. That's my personal preference, but these truths hold true for pretty much any type of pea. Now, peas are a vegetable that you could start in trays if you want, but I find that in fall temperatures they germinate very rapidly and they grow very well. So they are not something that you have to start from transplant. You can direct sow them, and it is always easier to direct sow, in my opinion, than to have to start your trays and transplant everything outside. That's just a couple of extra steps that you don't need to do. And peas are a nitrogen fixer, so they require little to no fertilizer. They actually filter the nitrogen directly out of the air and sort of feed themselves just by breathing. So they are a super easy thing to grow, and they require very little maintenance. The third vegetable that you should be direct sowing in your fall garden are carrots. Carrots are one of the easiest vegetables that you will ever grow. They are a root vegetable, so they need to be direct sown into the ground. They should not be grown as transplants because the root does not want to be disturbed once they germinate. Carrots are extremely hardy. Back in 2018, we had a 100-year freeze here on the southeastern North Carolina coast. My yard got as low as 8 degrees and then 9 degrees the next night, and my carrots suffered no damage at all. The tops turned a little bit brown, almost like a copper color, and as soon as the temperatures warmed back up, they turned perfectly green again, no damage at all, and I was harvesting awesome carrots in April. So I strongly recommend growing carrots in your garden because they take up very little space, they require very little fertilizing, almost no maintenance, no spraying because they have no pests. So they're one of the easiest things that you can grow over the fall, and in milder climates like zone 7 and warmer, you can grow them all throughout the winter. And the fourth and final vegetable that I recommend direct sowing in your fall garden are radishes. I know I keep saying this over and over, but once again, these are an incredibly easy thing to grow. Radishes will germinate and grow to full maturity in less than a month. Most varieties are somewhere around 25 to 28 days. Virtually no pests bother them, and they can survive incredibly low temperatures. Once again, my radishes also survive down to 8 degrees. It's because the earth protects them, because the earth tends to stay warm even when the air freezes. It holds its heat for a long period of time. So for most zones, zone 7 and above, maybe even down to zone 6, you can grow these all throughout the winter, especially if you have just a little bit of cover. You can really extend your harvests. These vegetables are commonly thought of as spring vegetables. A lot of people decide to plant these vegetables in early March or a month or so before the frost date ends, and they grow them into the spring. But I actually find that these cold tolerant vegetables are much easier to grow in the fall. And the reason why is a lot of these cool weather crops, they tend to bolt when the temperatures get warmer and the days get longer. And bolting means that the green tops, or the leafy greens, they try to go to seed, they try to reproduce. So when you grow these things in the late winter or early spring, the days lengthen and the temperatures of the day increases, and that warm temperatures they accelerate the metabolic rate of the plants so much that they tend to try and reproduce and go to seed. But in the fall they have an opposite effect, because the days are getting cooler and the days are getting shorter. So what will happen is these root vegetables will actually try to bulb out. They'll try to grow roots nice and big, which is what we're eating here. We're eating the beet root, we're eating the carrot root, we're eating the radish root. And it has a beneficial effect on the peas as well, because peas tend to yellow a little bit and get a little bit tough in the heat. But in the cool, all of these vegetables, they tend to collect sugars a lot more in their edible parts. So when these mature in the late fall or the early winter, you're not only growing vegetables that are much less likely to bolt, but they tend to have much higher concentrations of sugars, because they develop in cold weather, and everything tastes a lot better. So now that I've explained to you why I'm planting all 4 of these, I'm going to show you how to direct sow them into your garden. And here I have one of my 10x4 raised garden beds. I still have some peppers that are growing back here, but I cleaned out the rest of the garden bed, and I have a nice large space available to plant my fall crops. And the first thing that I want to tell you is you'll make your life a lot easier if you wet down your beds first, about an hour before you're going to plant them, and you let that water fully absorb into the soil. It is much easier to plant any kind of seeds in pre-moistened soil, because the rows and the imprints that you make won't try to collapse in on themselves. If the beds are dry, any kind of holes or trenches that you dig will kind of try and collapse on you. So this will make your life a whole lot easier. The second tip that I want to give you on direct sowing your vegetables is plant your vegetables in waves. I could sit here and I could plant an entire packet of beet seeds, but then I'm going to have something like 150 beets that come to maturity at the exact same time. So I'm going to go from 0 beets to potentially hundreds of beets. So what am I going to do with all of them? The same thing happens with your carrots, with your snap peas, with your radishes, etc., etc. So I recommend planting only 1 row at a time. Plant yourself 1 row of carrots, 1 row of beets, 1 row of peas, and 1 row of radishes, and then 2 weeks from now come back and plant another row of each, and do that in succession for about 6 weeks or so, and really spread your harvests out throughout the cool season and into the early winter, and if you're warm enough, deep into the winter. That way you'll have a constant supply of food that you can manage, instead of just getting a huge bolus of food that you ultimately have to either give away or throw out because you can't eat it all. So now we're going to prep our garden bed for planting the seeds, and you'll first notice that I have markings on my garden bed, and I have a marking on each foot, because I like to mark off each square foot of my garden. They go horizontally and vertically up the beds. So I laid a board that I have cut to length down that I'm going to use as a guide to keep my rows straight. And I'm going to start off with my beets. Now I have a red beet and a golden beet, so I'm going to plant 1 row of each. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my finger and I'm going to press my finger about 1 inch deep every 2 inches or so. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 1 beet seed in each of these holes that are spaced about 2 inches apart, and then I will thin the beets to about every 3 inches or so. That way they have maybe 3 to 4 inches, so they have enough room to bulb. And beet seeds are actually a collection of about 6 individual seeds, so you do not want to put multiple beet seeds in each hole, because each beet seed contains about 6 seeds, so you'll probably get anywhere from 4 to 6 plants that germinate per seed pod. So I just moved the board back, and I probably have about 6 or 7 inches between each row. So I'm going to use my finger to press more holes into the ground to plant more seeds. And you want to make sure that you leave at least 6 inches of space between each row, because you want to make sure that each bulb of beet has about 3 inches of its own space. That way it has enough room to get a pretty nice sized bulb on it. And now you can see the 2 rows of holes that I put in, and they travel the entire length of the raised bed. So the front row we're going to put our red beets, and the back row we're going to put our golden beets. And here you can clearly see what the beet seed pod looks like. And remember, this is a collection of about 6 beet seeds. So we're just going to drop one of these in each hole. And now we are going to plant our sugar snap peas, and we followed the same exact methodology that we did with the beets here. We have a number of holes that I pressed in with my finger that are 1 inch deep, and they are spaced about 2 inches apart, and I also spaced the rows about 6 inches apart. That way each row of peas gets a little bit of separation, because peas do benefit from a little bit of trellising for support. Some varieties try to climb more than others, so make sure you know the height of the peas that you are growing. All you have to do is really just put up a couple of 4-foot stakes, almost like what I have going on with my peppers here, and you can just run some twine between the stakes, and then just place your twine every, I don't know, 8 to 12 inches or something, just to give them something to latch onto. Or you could get like some kind of netting trellis and just wrap it around. It's really easy. They don't need a lot of strength in the support. They're pretty lightweight plants. They just need something to grab onto. So now let's plant our peas. And just like before, we are going to drop 1 pea seed in each hole. And that is really all it takes to plant your peas. Just make sure they're about 1 inch deep, because peas need to be planted a little bit deeper than most of your smaller seeds. Now radishes are even easier to plant than the peas or the beets. Radishes only need to be spaced about 2 inches apart from each other, and they only need to be placed about 1/2 inch deep. So my fingerprints here are quite small for the radishes. So once again, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to simply drop 1 seed into each planting hole, and then I will thin them as necessary. You can plant them tighter than this if you really want, and you want to hedge your bets, because if you can say plant them 1 inch apart, and then if they all come up, you can just rip out the radishes that are too close to each other and basically thin them out to half. But then you're really wasting a lot of seed, and this is all new seed for me, and I find germination rates for new seed is close to 90 to 100% in many cases. So I'm just going to go ahead and plant them to their final spacing, but let experience be your guide, and you can choose how close or far away to plant them. And the final thing that we are going to plant are our carrots. And I saved these for last because they're actually the most difficult thing to plant by far. Carrots are tough to germinate. They need a very shallow covering of soil on top of them, of only about 1/4 to 1/2 inch. On top of that, the soil needs to stay constantly moist in order for carrots to germinate. We're not going to put thumb holes in for carrots. We're going to plant them in trenches. The other thing we're going to do to help increase our chances of germinating the carrots is to actually place this board on top of them, because I'm going to water in the soil, place this board on top for 1 week, and this board is going to keep the soil underneath of it constantly moist, because it is going to prevent the sun from contacting the top of the soil. So I need to space my trenches so they are less than the width of the board in order to fit 2 trenches in. So I put this board specifically here as a guide, and I'm going to just run my trowel and put a little tiny trench in, and it's only going to be about 1/2 inch deep. And I'm just going to kind of vibrate the trowel and run it against the edge of that board. Then I'm going to slide this board back less than the width of the board, and I'm going to put another trench in right behind it. I'm only going to space the rows about 4 to 5 inches apart, and this board is a 2x8, so that gives me about 7 1/4 inches of width here. So we're going to put the other trench in right behind the other one. And you can see they are two pretty even lines, all about at the same uniform depth, and that's really all that we're looking for. And while the seeds for the beets, the peas, and the radishes are nice and round and large and easy to see, carrot seeds are really fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to very gently try to place the seeds into the trench. And it's going to be hard to not crowd these because the seeds are so small. So carrots, you're pretty much going to have to thin out 100% of the time, because you're almost always going to overplant your carrots. They're just very difficult to try and plant because the seeds are just so small. And now that all of our vegetables are planted, we are simply going to backfill all of our rows. So the carrots just need to be lightly tamped down, and you just need to collapse the sides of all the trenches and then press down on them firmly but not too hard. And that goes for all of these vegetables that we just planted. Collapse all of the different holes that we just planted. And now that everything's planted, we are going to water them in with a nice shallow watering to about the first top inch or so of the soil. And we are going to come out pretty much every morning and on really hot days in the morning and the evening. And we are going to water the top inch of this raised bed because we need to keep these seeds moist for them to germinate. And now that everything is watered in and the soil has absorbed all of the water, we are going to take our board and we are going to place it right on top of the 2 rows of carrots that we just planted. And having this board on top of the carrots is going to keep that soil a little bit moist. And I'm going to just lightly step on it just to try and keep that soil level so there's contact with the board. So now that it's on there, we're going to give everything about 7 days and we should start to see germination. So next Monday, I'm going to pick this up and take a peek under it and see if any of the carrots have begun germinating. It's currently Sunday, September 16th, and it's 6 days later, and you can see how everything is coming along in this garden. Here I have my beautiful row of Detroit dark red beets that are coming up. Here is the Burpee's golden beet. These 2 rows right here are the snap peas, and over here we have our radishes, and everything has come up very nicely. But under this board we have our carrots, so let's flip it over and see if we have germination. And here you can clearly see we have germination of the carrots, really good germination. But it looks like I actually should have removed this board sooner because they've been in the dark too long. So they need more sunlight because you can see they're reaching for the sun right now. But it's nice and sunny out, so they should recover just fine. And I have, wow, excellent germination for carrot seeds. So now we're going to give them full exposure to the sun, and they're going to toughen up. And in a couple of days, they're going to wind up looking pretty great. So let's do a little zoom in on this bed, and you can see just how nice everything is looking. And the top is starting to dry out a little bit, so we're going to have to water it in again. We want to make sure we keep this soil moist. Everyone, thank you so much for watching today's video. If you found it helpful, please make sure to hit that like button, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe for future updates and more videos like these. If you're curious about anything that I use in my garden, everything that I use is linked in my Amazon storefront in the video description. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video. Woof!